This week's Yoga Talk Show is brought to you by Prep Dish. Prep Dish is a healthy meal planning service, and here's how it works. You sign up, and every week you get a done-for-you grocery list, and then you get cooking instructions and food storage instructions. So basically, you go shopping on a Saturday, you go home, spend a couple hours in the kitchen, put a bunch of food in the freezer, a bunch of food in the fridge, and you're ready to go for the week. I've been doing this on my own for a number of years. I think it's just a really smart way to prep for a kitchen. I learned doing this in the restaurant business. This is how they do it in any restaurant, in any industrial kitchen. It's a great way to run your home kitchen as well. So you prep a bunch of stuff on the weekend, and then during the week, basically you do nothing. You come home from work, you throw something in a bowl, throw something, heat it up, and you're good to go. You got some healthy food. There are a bunch of these meal ordering services now, and people try to order healthy takeout. But I mean, really, who's going to spend 30, 40, 50 bucks a day on takeout food? It's not really very practical long term. Prep Dish makes it super cheap. It's as little as 30 cents per day, and you don't have to think. You get your grocery list, you get your food instructions, make really, really great stuff, and you do it yourself. So just for listeners, get your first 2 weeks free by visiting prepdish.com/yogabody and use the code YOGABODY at checkout. My first experience with hypnosis was watching a stage hypnotist when I was about 16 years old, and it was at a school function. And most of the people who the hypnotist drew up on stage were people I knew pretty well. Some of them I knew very well. They were friends. Other people were classmates who I knew relatively well. And I was really shocked and surprised to see how quickly the hypnotist could get people to bark like a dog, to do weird contortions, to leave stage and run around. It seemed unbelievable, and yet it was happening. And it really confused me and kind of confused everyone watching. And it's one of those things that's kind of puzzling if you've ever seen a stage hypnotist. And it left kind of a bad taste in my mouth. Not that there was anything wrong with it, but it certainly didn't seem like something that was beneficial or safe or healing. Fast forward, 20 years later, I was introduced to hypnosis for dealing with phobias, hypnosis for dealing with addiction, hypnosis for even dealing with things like pain. And I started meeting people who were getting really great results. I started using self-hypnosis, mainly through recordings, and getting some pretty interesting results. Definitely nothing dramatic. I didn't, completely transform my life or anything, but absolutely noticeable. And it really opened my eyes. Unfortunately, the world of hypnosis is filled with scam artists and stage performers and things that really hype it up and give it a bad name. But the underlying basis of hypnosis and the clinical research and a very small selection of therapists out there are doing really amazing work. On this week's Yoga Talk Show, we'll talk about hypnosis used for creating lasting change in your life, for being the impetus for change in your life. And I think you'll get some really great ideas. And I'd encourage you to keep an open mind as well, but a skeptical mind. You need to really choose your hypnotherapist and choose your information wisely, because it is certainly a space filled with charlatans. But there are some really, really great therapists out there, one of whom I'll introduce to you now. So hello and welcome everyone. This is Lucas Rockwood with the Yoga Talk Show, and thanks for tuning in. Today's show is called The Truth About Hypnotherapy, and I'm here with Grace Smith. Grace is on a mission to make hypnosis mainstream. She's got a really unique story and a unique background. She's a regular guest on CBS's hit show The Doctors. Her work has been featured in The Atlantic, Marie Claire, Forbes, Mind Body Green, BuzzFeed, Bustle, InStyle, and a whole bunch of other places online. She has celebrity clients, CEOs, relatives, and everyone in between. She has a new book out, just came out. I just got it on Audible. I haven't listened to it yet, but I'm excited. It's Close Your Eyes, Get Free. You can find it on Amazon, or you can go to her main site, which is GS, like Grace Smith, gshypnosis.com. Grace, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I understand you had a personal health crisis in your early 20s. I have kind of a similar story. Maybe you could share what happened with that crisis and how that led you down the path of hypnosis.
So when I first graduated from college, it was 2008, and I entered into the world of large-scale fundraising. I was working for the largest fundraising firm in the world, and the campaigns we worked on were in the hundreds of millions of dollars, raising money for things like building new hospital wings and redoing schools and just these big goals that we had set, which meant lots of deadlines, lots of benchmarks, and lots of stress. Now, if you remember what was happening in the economy in 2008, 2009, it was not an ideal climate to be asking people for money. They were losing their jobs, losing their pensions, losing their retirement. And so this is the first time I was out in the world having to pay rent and my cell phone and my college loans. And every day I woke up thinking I was about to lose my job because we weren't, as the company, meeting our quotas. So I developed anxiety in a way that I'd never experienced before. And I had no healthy coping mechanisms for that anxiety. And because of the anxiety, I started experiencing things like depression and just this endless cycle of waking up feeling fearful. And so what I would do throughout the day, and especially as the day went on, because I was in my early 20s and I thought that this is just what everybody did, is I started self-medicating with drugs and alcohol. And I was very, very lucky in that it got out of control very fast. And I got sober at the age of 24. And I mean that completely. It's been 8 years now, so I can look back and say, I'm so lucky this happened. But of course, while I was going through it, it was traumatic and heartbreaking. And that was my whole, identity was tied to partying at night. All my friends partied. So it was a very difficult, dark time. But 6 months into my sobriety, I said, okay, I'm getting used to this new lifestyle. I'm looking into self-help more, personal development more. I'm realizing I don't have all the answers, but I'm still chain smoking. And I'm so sick of it. If I could stop the drugs and alcohol, why am I still chain smoking? I tried the gums, the patches, cold turkey, nothing's working. And that's when someone suggested hypnosis. And I promised Lucas, if someone had said it 6 months earlier before I'd gotten sober, I would have, with my arms crossed over my chest, said, absolutely not. What is that? Swinging watches, clucking like a chicken. How could that ever help me? There's no way. But I had been so humbled through my experience that I said, you know what? What do I have to lose? Let me give it a shot. And that's what got me to my first session.
It's amazing. Interestingly, I have a very similar story. 24 years old, similar problem, drug and alcohol problems. And my sort of light switch got flicked with yoga. But very, very similar path. I have an interesting story with hypnotherapy, too. I had a similar skepticism about hypnosis and hypnotherapy. Like a lot of people, I had experienced hypnosis sideshows. I saw a guy on stage make people literally, like you said, cluck like a chicken and do crazy stuff, which was impressive, disturbing, weird, but certainly didn't seem like something that would help me with my head trash. But I got, for about 4 or 5 years, I owned and operated a very large weight loss business, and our main focus was on helping people relieve stress. And so we got into a whole bunch of modalities, from trauma release to EMDR to tapping and all kinds of things. And somewhere along the line, I got introduced to some hypnotherapists, and I was very skeptical as well. But I always tested all of this stuff out. So during this period of my life, I was tapping and I was, doing all kinds of different healing modalities just to test them out and understand how they worked and if they worked for me. And I had, this was quite a number of years ago, and somehow I loaded it up. This must have been a long time ago actually, because it was on an iPod. And somehow I loaded it up on an iPod, and it was skipping from song to song to song. So in any case, I'd fall asleep listening to this hypnotherapy thing, and I just kept listening to these tracks again and again and again. They were weight loss tracks, really simple, nothing woo or crazy or anything like that. But I'm not a guy who needed to lose weight. In fact, on most days I could use a couple extra pounds, and I just would wake up and I would have absolutely no interest in food at all. And I kept doing this because I was doing this for work, not for personal. And about 10 days into this experiment, I realized what was going on, because I was losing weight. I was really not hungry, and I was worried about it. I was, why am I uninterested in food? And I really had this revelation that, wow, these little silly recordings that I'm listening to before bed are totally killing my interest in food. Now, the results with my clients really vary. Some people get really amazing results, some people don't. With all things, I just find it as a tool and a toolkit, but it really shifted my perspective. And the reason I'm telling you this story is because I want to address this sort of stigmatization of hypnotherapy, which unfortunately is still there. And people have the experience of the party hypnotherapist who, makes people cluck like a chicken. People also have the experience of the hypnotherapist who's going to help them find love or get rich, and, all of these sort of wild pie in the sky claims. How do you deal with that? And how you're in an industry that, it almost makes people chuckle even if you say hypnosis, but there's really amazing benefits that people are getting.
my experience was exactly the same, total skepticism. But what happened was when I went in, I quit smoking in one session, and I said to myself, this feels like a human rights issue here, that anybody has emphysema, anybody has lung cancer, like anybody is smoking who doesn't want to smoke. What is this thing? So as I started to learn more about it, what I realized was hypnosis has one problem, and the problem is a PR problem. It's been misrepresented so many times by Hollywood, stage show hypnotherapists, and even hypnotherapists who mean well, but sort of tag along with that marketing of like one session will change your life. Now, I quit smoking in one session, but that is an outlier experience. The average is 6 sessions to see 93% improvement, which is still phenomenally rapid and powerful. I mean, 6 sessions to experience 92% improvement is faster than anything else that I know of, which is why I made this my life's work. But I really see my job as being approachable enough and reaching enough people to just say, you know what do you have to lose? Give it a shot. Because then, similar to your experience, Lucas, and similar to mine, you can go in a skeptic and come out on the other side being like, oh my God, this is so different from what I expected. Not only was it relaxing, not only did I feel completely in control and safe the entire time, there was nothing mind controlling about it, but it's also fascinating what we learn about ourselves when we're actively in a hypnotherapy session. So you were listening to recordings before bed, so it's not very interactive. It's more of just a conditioning experience, which is also very effective, but not quite as fascinating. When you're in a session and you say to yourself, what is the subconscious block? I really do want to be a dynamic, powerful public speaker. Why am I so afraid? Finding out your unique subconscious reasoning behind those self-sabotage techniques is also fascinating. So here I am saying, okay, it's relaxing, it's safe and calm, it's empowering and fascinating. This is the exact opposite of what I expected. So that's exactly right. I tell people I'm a hypnotist, and, sometimes they laugh in my face, or they put their fingers up like an X, like they're trying to get rid of a vampire. And it's so funny because when I worked in sales and in fundraising, I was not making a tangible difference day to day. It sounded great. We're raising all this money, yada, yada, but really it was, bureaucracy. It was corporate America. There was a lot of ego involved. It wasn't making a difference in a big way, but it sounded good. Now I have a job that sounds weird, but I've never made more of a difference in my life than I have with this work in helping people transform their lives. And, just briefly, I'll let you know, when I first started, I wasn't ready to give up my corporate career. I was really dipping my toe in this because I was shocked at how effective it was. I felt a duty to know what it was, but I wasn't ready to go all in. But early on in my career, when I was only doing this part-time, a man broke through his paralysis during our session together. He was paralyzed on the left-hand side of his body through a stroke. And because of hypnosis, he moved through his paralysis and is now walking without a cane. And that's the day I quit my job in corporate. I literally called my boss walking home from that session and put in my 2 weeks notice. Because I said, whatever this is that allowed me to quit smoking, that person to lose weight, that person to stop biting their nails, that person to fly with a fear. Now this man just broke through his paralysis. The world at least needs to know that this is an option and that it isn't clucking chickens, and I won't stop until that's the case, until it's mainstream.
I wanted to chat about what conditions, what challenges people have that hypnosis is maybe a safer or a surer thing for, and what topics maybe it's not appropriate for. And I guess the reason I ask is, as a yoga teacher, and I own studios, and I have for a number of years, people walk in the door with all kinds of stuff, and they'll really throw it at anybody, and it's really heavy stuff. Child abuse, sexual assault, death, violence, war, all kinds of things, PTSD. And anybody working in any kind of healing arts gets confronted with this stuff on a really daily basis. And this concept of do no harm, know your place, know your responsibility, it's something that is tested a lot. And a lot of people overstep their qualifications, and in an age where mental health is at such a low level, where suicide rates are shockingly high, it's affected pretty much everyone I know with 1 degree of separation. I get really nervous about people. Somebody has a smoking problem, they go see a hypnotherapist, go for it. What's the worst that can happen? But if somebody has PTSD or sexual assault or abuse, and they're background, how do you think about that in terms of like a responsible clinician perspective?
Absolutely. I'm so glad you asked this. So as a hypnotherapist, I don't focus on the trauma. I don't focus on the issue. I don't focus on the actual problem. I focus on the result they want instead. So I have helped so many women who have been through sexual abuse because they don't want to be identified as a victim anymore in their own minds or in the outer world. But I would say if you wanted to go back and really focus on the trauma itself, I am not a certified mental health practitioner, but what I do is I help the woman in their subconscious mind own their power, own their healing, not be a victim. Sometimes it means going back to the experience and visualizing it in a different way, where perhaps the perpetrator ends up in jail or they end up beating the shit out of them if that's cathartic for them. And what this does is, someone might say, oh, but that's not reality. Isn't that going to create false memories? It's not eternal sunshine of the spotless mind. You can't erase what happened. So what happens is in the subconscious level, this person has been through a traumatic event. And subconsciously now, every action they take from that traumatic day moving forward is being impacted by that experience. Subconsciously, if we go back and have a different experience, it doesn't change the conscious memory of what happened, but it changes the subconscious way in which we react to everything moving forward. So I have one particular client in mind. We speak regularly now. She was abused by a member of her family. And for decades, she lived a small life where she wouldn't take risks and she wasn't living up to her potential and she didn't believe in herself and she had shame and rage that she had been to a therapist for decades, many different therapists, and nothing had changed. In a course of 10 hypnotherapy sessions, she says to me to this day, I completely was reborn. I took my life back. And she doesn't feel like I did it. I didn't do it. She did it. And she is now able to live her life from a place of power instead of fear. But she consciously knows exactly what happened. None of the memories were changed from a conscious level, but from a subconscious level, she's completely different. So people will say that if a hypnotherapist isn't also a psychologist or a psychiatrist, are they equipped to be able to help? And I'd say that needs to come down to your discernment. Now, I'm very biased in that hypnotherapy is something people come to as a last resort because of the way it's misunderstood. Very few people go to hypnosis first. They go to it last, which means they've done everything else. They've gone to psychiatrists, they've gone to psychologists, they've gone to life coaches, they've taken medication, they've done the tapping, they've done everything else. And then they come to hypnosis, and then they say, this is the one thing that healed me. This is the one thing that transformed me. Because our fears, our habits, our beliefs, our emotional responses live in the subconscious mind, and hypnosis is the most effective way to access the subconscious. Now, that having been said, in my school where I train hypnotherapists, a lot of people coming to our school are mental health practitioners. They are social workers. They are psychologists and psychiatrists. So when someone comes to our company and says, I'm working on trauma, I'm working on PTSD, we will naturally assign them to someone who has greater qualifications to work with those specifics versus, let's say, someone working on overcoming a fear of flying. But I do want everyone to know that it really comes down to your discernment. You have to make sure that you're working with a practitioner who receives the highest level of qualifications and trainings within hypnotherapy, for sure. Make sure that they have incredible testimonials and that you feel comfortable with them as a person and in their ethos. But I would say it's dangerous to suggest that hypnotherapy can't help with our deeper issues when, in my personal experience, what I hear from my clients is many times it's the only thing that actually helps them heal through and through.
I have a couple of talk therapy, like traditional therapy friends, and one of the interesting things that they shared with me, which I never really thought of, is they say, people in normal life lie a lot. Everyone kind of lies, but people also lie to their therapist. And even though they're in talk therapy, people still lie and they're unable or unwilling or whatever. Maybe they just can't even articulate what happened or what's really going on. And that's why I think it's very interesting. I think we're always trying to think, talk therapy versus hypnotherapy or NLP or tapping or EMDR or whatever it is. But I think it's really both because it's different. There's a huge value in talking through issues. But there's a lot of stuff that you cannot or will not talk through. And yet at the same time, a trained therapist can ask you a question and then have you do something, whether it's a visualization, whether it's an EMDR thing, or whether it's a meridian point tapping or whatever it is. It's a different way to access stuff. And no matter how honest you think you can be with your heart-to-heart therapist, most of us are lying. Like you can't get fully honest. And in some cases, you don't have words to articulate the feelings that you had when you got dumped when you were 17 or whatever it is. Like you don't have the vocabulary. And so it's a different way to access pain and trauma and confusion and insecurity. And I think that, therapists are always arguing which is better. It's kind of like, I don't know, all of it, whatever works for you. And it
totally.
It is interesting because people will often gravitate towards one thing and think it's the answer, and it really just depends on the person. And so I think it's really worth experimenting with, and people are often surprised by how one modality will really connect with them at different stages in their life and something else at a different stage.
Yeah, well, there's statistics that I learned 33% improvement, whereas that 6 sessions of hypnotherapy resulted in 93% improvement on average. And, this is not to say that talk therapy doesn't have value because, again, my experience is entirely biased. If talk therapy is resulting in what the client needs, then they're not even going to get to hypnosis, right? Because they've already resolved the issue. So I'm really seeing the people where it's still not resolved. But I think that statistic is important to know because when we think about our problems, when we talk about our problems, when we feel the emotions surrounding our problems, we're strengthening those neurological connections in our brain. So in many ways, we're strengthening the problem. And we are creating a situation where it's likely that we'll feel that way and experience those thoughts and behave that way again in the future. With hypnosis, because you're feeling so wonderfully, deeply relaxed in the session, you have the surplus energy required to create new neurological connections in the brain very, very quickly. And so you can leave with a new thought, a new belief, a new way of being very fast. And it doesn't require harping on or talking about the existing issue very much at all. It's more like we name it so we know what we're moving away from. And then the entire rest of the time we're focusing on the way we want to be instead. And I want to mention how in the beginning where you said, some clients see results, some don't. You were losing weight without even necessarily not being your goal, which is that you have to want the result in order to experience it.
This week's Yoga Talk Show is brought to you by Prep Dish. Prep Dish is a healthy meal planning service where you sign up and every week you'll get a done-for-you grocery list sent to you along with cooking and storage instructions. So you go shopping, you go home, spend a couple hours working on food for the week, and then you're done for the whole week. Makes your life really, really simple, and more than anything, makes it easy and very inexpensive to eat healthy food. It's a big challenge for all of us. Just for Yoga Talk Show listeners, you get your first 2 weeks free by going to prepdish.com/yogabody.
You have to want the result in order to experience it. So I want to talk through a little bit, how is it even possible that you were losing weight if you didn't want to? And why do some people see results and why do some not? So a very brief example of this is a woman came to me in her late 40s. She was still smoking. She hated it, hated the smell, hated the fact that she smoked, was so ready to quit, and was very upset about smoking in front of her children. She quit in 3 sessions. Again, the average, she had very high motivation. Now, I was a rookie hypnotherapist at the time, had just started my practice, didn't fully understand just how important desire was when it came into play with results. So, lo and behold, she brought me her son, who she just found out a few weeks later was now smoking, sneaking around, having a cigarette here or there, and he was 13. He didn't want to quit. So 8 sessions in, he's still smoking, even though she quit in 3. And so I'm saying, what's going on here? It's the same tool, it's the same technique. Why is this person quitting smoking? So I finally said to him, do you want to quit smoking? And he said, no, I don't want to quit. And I said, what do you want to do instead? He said, I would be better at skateboarding. So we used the session on that. The following weekend, he placed second in a skateboarding competition, and he's never placed before in his life. So the desire has to be there in order for it to be effective, which totally negates the idea that it could be possible to control someone else's mind because they'd have to want it in the first place. So my suspicion is probably the fact that you were losing interest in food and losing weight there, even though it wasn't a desire for you, was that you did have a desire to test the efficacy of hypnosis for your clients who were using it to lose weight. But I want everyone to know If it's like, oh, I shouldn't smoke, but I love it, will hypnosis work? No, it won't. You have to want the result. And the more you want it, the faster you'll see the result.
I want to come back to this PR problem with hypnosis because there's a huge problem. We have the same thing in yoga. People say like yoga cures cancer and yoga cures depression. They make these radical health claims. With hypnosis, it's really a huge problem. I mean, there's some of the most famous hypnotherapists have books called "I Will Make You Rich." It's like
Right.
you go from quitting smoking to becoming rich and marrying your perfect dream mate. And I don't know what is the solution. I guess with yoga, my hope is that there's more regulation. I mean, you don't see traditional psychotherapists making like radical claims like "I will save your marriage" or "I will."
It's illegal.
It's illegal, right? So this is what I come back to with yoga is everyone in my industry is fighting regulation, and I'm just begging for it. I just like regulate the hell out of us, please. Like let's have some standards here, so we don't have yoga for curing cancer. Let's have some standards so that it's illegal for a hypnotherapist to go on television and say, "I will make you rich. I will find your dream mate." What do you think about this? I don't know about the regulation of hypnotherapy. I'm guessing it's totally unregulated, but what are your thoughts?
I have chills. I couldn't agree with you more. I have a friend and colleague named Elliot Rowe, who's a very prestigious hypnotherapist in Vegas, and he's helped the top poker players in the world who, win $21 million bounties. And so if anybody could claim "I'll make you rich," it would be Elliot, right? But he would never make that claim because that's not what's happening here. What's happening is he's helping people who have honed a skill over a lifetime, who are already at the top of their game, overcome any self-sabotage or subconscious things that might be impacting their tell or their strategy. So I am all about regulation. Bring it on. I'm going to be a part of the boards that increase regulation. And it's why my hypnotherapy school has the highest standards of any other certification school in the country, because it's still not enough. We are going to go in the direction, I'm absolutely certain, of chiropractic and acupuncture, where many decades ago you could call yourself an acupuncture after a week-long training. And now it's a 4-year undergraduate degree and a board certification and keeping up with your CEUs. And hypnotherapy absolutely will go that route because it is so tremendously effective. And there are studies showing things like the use of hypnotherapy increased there's like a million different studies in my mind right now, and I'll tell you two of the top that are just so shocking. It found that bones healed 40% faster in the group that used hypnotherapy versus the ones that didn't. And in women with breast cancer, it found that pain levels were decreased by 70% in the control group that used hypnosis. And that in the 10-year follow-up study, the survival rates of the women were 50% higher in the group that used hypnosis. So hypnosis actually is being used in the medical community to unbelievable extent, but it has to be regulated in order for those things to be used effectively and in order for those studies to continue and in order for the people who are the practitioners to be able to help. Because hypnotherapists now, if you had got a 7-day training and you go out into the world and say you're a hypnotherapist versus someone who had hundreds of hours of training and practice, you are not the same hypnotherapist. And you are not going to elicit the same results. And you do not have the same qualifications to work in medical hypnosis as you do with performance hypnosis, as you do with poker hypnosis, right? There's specialities. And even if hypnosis can help with all of those things, you are not an expert and able to help someone in all of those areas after 7 days. You're just not. And so what's going to happen when the regulation does set in, and I hope it does sooner rather than later, is that people who had those certifications will not be grandfathered in and will not be able to practice. And so when I created my school, I said, what are the highest standards? We're going to add 100 hours to that. We're not in a place where I can create a 4-year undergraduate degree as a one individual person, but the people who graduate from my school will be grandfathered in as those regulations fit in because they already were the most highly trained and certified. So one step that I don't talk about very often that I know I'm going to take is a class action lawsuit against Hollywood and stage hypnotists, which is not making me very popular in the field. But it's not that I want to punish past screenwriters. I think that in the past, hypnosis was shown as this device of like, why would somebody who wouldn't otherwise do this thing? Oh, well, use hypnosis. But it's just false. It's just a lie that's not something that's true, and it's hurting people, because if you see Get Out and you're thinking of the sunken place, you're never going to turn to hypnosis to help you overcome this thing that you don't need to continue to needlessly suffer with. So a class action lawsuit to make sure Hollywood can no longer portray hypnosis as something it isn't, and a class action lawsuit against the stage hypnotists who are making hypnosis look like mind control when it isn't. Because, look, that's funny. It's funny. Call it mentalism. Call it something else. Call it mesmerism. That's what it is. It's a descendant of this guy named Franz Mesmer from the 1850s. Call it mesmerism, but don't call it hypnosis, because it's not what it is, and it's hurting people to call it that.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of stage hypnotist shows, and they're totally shocking. And people I know went up on stage and did bizarre. Even as you're watching it, you think it's staged, and yet it's not, because you know the people involved. So talk people through. You brought that up, so I think we should unpack that. What is the difference between somebody who's mesmerized or somebody who's hypnotized, and how is that even possible that someone can get up in front of a group of people and get people to behave that way?
Absolutely. So the next time you see one of these shows, I want everyone to notice, they never, ever, ever drag people up on stage against their will. Everyone on stage raised their hand and volunteered, which means they wanted the result. Then watch the show as it continues along. If they stop participating, they're taken off the stage, so that if 20 people start during these stage shows, there's only one or two left at the end. And they are the ones that every time they were given a suggestion, they followed through. And what that means is you're watching the people who are not only potentially somnambulist, which means that they go instantly into the theta brainwave state, and they're about 1 in every 100,000 people are somnambulists, so it's very rare. But you're also watching the people who wanted the result more than anyone else. Meaning they wanted to get up there and dance like Beyonce. They wanted to get up there and talk like a Martian or hump a pole or do something ridiculous and outlandish. And, I had a hypnotherapy instructor once who volunteered because he wanted to understand it better himself. And the first suggestions were very benign, things like pretend that you're, playing a trumpet in band. And he was deeply relaxed in the theta state, and so he went along with it. He absorbed the suggestion. Why not? He raised his hand. He's volunteering. He didn't want to make the other hypnotist look bad. He knew that everybody in the audience wanted to show. There was a lot of motivation for him to go through with the suggestion. He wanted the result. Now the show goes on and on and on. Now, one of the suggestions is go sit in the audience in the lap of the person that you think is sexiest, and it can't be someone you came with. And he was there with his wife. So did he move? Did he get out of his chair? Absolutely not. He did not absorb the suggestion. The reward was going to be nowhere near the amount of pain if he went home after that day and his wife was totally pissed at him. But there was a 16-year-old kid who had volunteered to be in the show, and he ran out into the audience and stood on a woman's lap in the front row, and everybody thought it was hysterical. So, these things look like it's magic. They look like it's mind control, but everybody up there is making a conscious choice as to which suggestions they're absorbing and which they aren't. And typically at the end of these shows, the hypnotist will suggest, if you want to forget what you did up here, you'll forget. You will experience amnesia. And because they just made an ass of themselves, whether it was a conscious, whether they wanted the result or they got removed from the stage, they absorbed the suggestion of forgetting what they did, because it's so much easier to just say, oh, I have no recollection of the fact that I did that, versus saying, oh, yeah, I was totally aware of the fact that I was up there dancing. So it's not as mythical and magical. It's still fun and funny, but everybody up there is totally in control the entire time. And if you ask them after the fact and they say, I don't remember, think back to yourself, oh, did the hypnotist give that suggestion? And that would be the only reason why. Because my clients remember every session. There's no amnesia. You remember everything. And that's part of the power of it, is you realize where you started and you remember where you ended up.
Group dynamics are just such a strange thing in general. I've just been fascinated with it. I run group events for 12 years or something like that. And every group has dynamics, and I think that the hypnotherapy group is dynamic of its own, and some people are going to assume that role. But it's always surprising to me, in a group, someone is always the funny one, someone who's always outspoken, someone's always late. And for me, when I see it, like group dynamics hit in at about above 20 people, it's just so predictable. I've just been doing these events for so long. It's just, we're such strange social creatures that it's interesting to see that really extremely played out on a hypnotist stage. But Grace, I love the work that you're doing. For people listening, 2 questions. One, for people who would like to experiment, who would like to try hypnotherapy for a smoking problem, for an eating problem, for a past trauma, what would your suggestion be? And number 2, how can people get in touch with you and check out your book?
Absolutely. So there's so many different ways that hypnosis can help you, and it really comes down to what's going on in your bank account, right? Because you can do private hypnotherapy sessions, which are definitely the most rapid way to experience change, but they're also the most expensive, so they can be cost prohibitive. But if you go to hypnosis.com, there's a whole incredible group of graduates from my hypnotherapy school who are at the top of their class who we then hired. I would say have a phone session with them. They are so powerful and amazing. From there, things that get less expensive and which are still very powerful but take longer to see the result are things like hypnosis recordings, our app. You can also find them on the site. And then the most empowering way, I think, to do it is free. It's self-hypnosis. It's you in your own mind conditioning yourself with the thoughts you want to have instead of the ones you're currently experiencing. And I teach you how to do that with my book, and that's Close Your Eyes, Get Free. So for $10, you can teach yourself self-hypnosis. Obviously, it's not going to be the same thing as working with a trained professional who can go back and heal your trauma. But if you're going into a work situation, a family situation where you're feeling stress, anxiety, you're not in the state you want to be in, you can absolutely use hypnosis to change your state in that moment in a very powerful, comprehensive, and healing way. So I would go for the book for sure across the board to learn more about it, and then go from there as your finances allow. And you can find all things about me and our work and what we're doing at gshypnosis.com, also on Instagram at Grace Smith TV. I oftentimes go live and do group hypnosis over Instagram, which is really fun, and on Facebook as well at Grace Smith TV. And Lucas, I'm just so impressed with everything you're doing in the world. I love what a steady, rational, grounded way that you present yoga to the world, and I'm so honored that you had me on. It's such a gift to be able to share this with your community.
Thanks so much for your work, and thanks for coming on the show, Grace. I really appreciate it. I have extremely high arches. I always have, it's genetic, but I made it worse by wearing orthotic inserts and by wearing extremely high arch support shoes, which sounded and still sounds like a really great idea for somebody with excessively high arches. But the problem is when you crutch, when you brace an arch that's already too high, it just gets worse. And so by the time I was in my 20s, my arches were so high that when I stood on the ground, I could slide a pencil underneath both my feet without touching my foot. An arch is not what I had a bridge. Now, a lot of people think, oh, that's great, high arches are amazing. Well, that's true to an extent. My arches were so high that I had calf pain. When I did forward bends, it didn't hurt my hamstrings. It hurt my calves. It messed up my running gait. I got tendinitis in my heels for many, many years. Whenever I would run, messed up my walking gait and my posture. And still to this day, it really affects my balance because I have so little surface area on the ground. I've done a whole bunch of things to help to rehabilitate my feet, including spending over 5 years pretty much barefoot when I was living in Thailand, and that helped a lot. But nothing has helped more than actively stretching my feet with toe separators. I've played around with lots of them, and I bought pretty much every model on the planet, everything that I could find, things designed by podiatrists, things designed by nail salons, and everything in between. And the truth is, everything helps. So if you don't have anything, use those little nail spreaders, those will work too. But over the years, I wanted to create one that I could use in yoga class, and most importantly, one that I could work with inside minimal shoes. So if you've listened to any of our shows about minimal shoes, those are zero drop, wide toe box, and as little support as you can. I often wear shoes like Lems. There's also Merrells. There's also there's tons of barefoot style minimal shoes. Nike Frees are a common model that people wear. And I wanted to create something I could wear comfortably inside those shoes when I was walking, because I quickly realized that impact, meaning putting pressure on my toes while they were being stretched, made a very big difference. So we created something called Awesome Toes. Everyone on my team thought they were ridiculous. Why are we creating rubber toe stretchers? We're a yoga company. But it has turned into this sleeper success. We now have Awesome Toes clients all over the world, something like 46 different countries, and it's really, really popular. People wear them around the house, people wear them inside minimal shoes, people wear them when they're doing gentle yoga practices, and some people wear them while they're watching television, but the best way to use them is actively, so while you're walking around, even if you're just doing it around the house. What are the benefits? Well, one of the biggest benefits is it actively stretches out your toes, and so if you look down at your toes, if you're like most people like me, your toes are probably all squished up, in some cases overlapping, in some cases hammer toe, overlapping toe. We do this because we all jam our feet into shoes that are too small, or even more common, shoes that are not shaped like our foot, right? We have these pointy shaped shoes and our feet are not shaped that way. And so it helps to return your toes back to their natural shape. We have super happy clients all over the world. You can read, we have over 1,000 reviews online. To learn more, go to shop.yogabody.com, or else you can go to awesometoes.com. They come in a really beautiful bamboo box, and I'd encourage you to aim for wearing them at least 15 minutes per day for best results. Today's nutritional tip is in response to a listener question about tannins. Tannins are found in lots and lots of plant foods. They're a phytonutrient, a plant nutrient. The simple way to think about them is that if you think about things that stain your teeth, like red wine, like green and black tea, for example, they're really high in that kind of astringent flavor, that acrid taste that you get from a glass of black tea with nothing else in it. Here's the thing about tannins. They have health benefits and also health drawbacks. Like a lot of foods, they have a heads and a tails, and it really depends on you. For some people, they cause stomach irritation, nausea, vomiting, and even liver damage. The most common thing is people will feel kind of sick. And some people, just the smell of a really black tea can cause them an upset stomach. On the flip side, tannins are antimicrobial. They've been shown to even have potential anti-carcinogen effects. And so they have some really interesting uses as well, topically used for hair loss and skincare and all kinds of other things. Like a lot of food nutrients and a lot of nutrients in general, it's just really complicated in terms of how they play out. In terms of how you should think about them, I would think about the things that are really high in tannins. For example, teas, red wines, almonds, for example, and think about how you react. If you're sensitive to them, tannins are pretty simple to avoid or reduce. For example, teas, you could switch from high tannin teas to more herbal infusions. If you're sensitive to the tannins in almonds, for example, which a lot of people are, raw almonds will give people an upset stomach, you can soak those almonds and rinse those tannins out, right? When you soak almonds, that rinse water is very brown. You're literally rinsing away the tannins, that tannic acid, which can be upsetting to your stomach. So again, nothing definitive to say except that, like a lot of things, it has a heads and a tails. Figure out what works for you and make a choice. We have a question this week from listener Teresa. Teresa says, I really enjoy your podcast. The weight loss show was so inspiring. I have never lost the 7 pounds I gained after having my child 6 years ago. I taught yoga prior to getting pregnant and had a very active gym workout. However, after having my daughter, I stopped teaching and decreased my movement dramatically. I now focus on lawn mowing and house cleaning. I fit in yoga, pull-ups, rebounder when I can. I've been following a low-fat, high-carb way of eating. I use Anthony Williams' food herb suggestions to heal my thyroid. That said, I'm wondering if you know of anyone who's healed thyroid while eating IF, intermittent fasting, with lower carbs and higher fat. I find that I'm already over the goal of carbs. Do you consume little or no fruit in order to make the carb goal? Any other protein suggestions other than nuts, seeds, lentils, garbanzos? I also consume spirulina, barley grass juice powder, nori dulse. Just not sure how to make this work. Thanks for all your insights. Your commitment and passion is admirable. Thanks so much, Teresa. In terms of what to do here, so first of all, 7 pounds is not very much weight. And so that's the good news. You haven't gained much weight, probably hasn't actually affected your health, I'm guessing, at all. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't want to get rid of it. Totally understand. And if you want that you can have that. And so what can you do? I think what you're blaming is this lack of activity, meaning you've changed your movement patterns for the 7 pounds. I'm going to go out on a limb and say probably what changed here is your chemical body, your endocrine system, your hormones, especially since you're referencing thyroid issues. Super common, different phases of life, super common when you're not sleeping as much, like when you have a young child, even at 6 years old. I'm guessing your kid still wakes you up in the middle of the night. Mine certainly do. And all those things can totally mess up your hormones, and you can put on 7 pounds in a hot minute. The one thing I will tell you is that a low-fat, high-carb way of eating is a total train wreck. You might be able to get away with it when you're younger, or if you're really active, or if you're very athletic. But long-term, unless you're just great at portion control, that will take you in a really bad place. So general rule that we always throw out, 1 gram of carbs per pound of ideal body weight per day. So you want to weigh 150 pounds, 150-ish grams of carbs per day. You take that number and cut it in half for minimum grams of protein. So 150 pounds, that's your ideal body weight. Cut that number in half, 150. Now we're at 75 grams as minimum amount of protein. And then you fill in the rest with fat. What this will look like for most of you when you try this way of eating is you will not feel starving. You will feel very much like you're eating half portions of things like rice and potatoes and bread and grains and these kinds of things. You'll definitely feel like you're eating half portions, but you won't feel like they're just completely gone, which is what a lot of people try to do, and it makes them feel crazy. You also won't feel jittery or weird. You'll feel totally normal, because guess what? It is totally normal. The protein thing, most of you are probably eating enough protein already. You might need to up it a little bit if you're a plant-based person. And then the fat thing will totally freak you out, because you need to slather your vegetables in butter or coconut oil or ghee or olive oil or whatever it is that you're eating. And for most people, they're going from, eating maybe 30 grams of fat per day, maybe up to 100 grams or even more per day. There are days when I eat over 150 grams of fat. And that's a big shift. Shift in your digestive system. You need a whole different enzyme base. You need quite a bit more bile to digest all that fat. It doesn't happen immediately. It takes some time, but it's a really important transition that can really have a dramatic effect. In terms of, do I eat fruit? I eat fruit every day, and I have for a long time. I try to limit my fruit to a couple pieces of fruit per day. I love fruit. I'm a huge fruit guy. I come from a raw food background, and I think I probably overdid it on fruit for many years, in fact. And nothing wrong with fruit, they're really high in fructose, especially modern fruits. And fructose in large doses, which we will just define as 25 grams per day or more, can lead to all kinds of funny problems like abdominal fat, like higher triglycerides, like blood sugar issues. Even though, yes, fructose is slower to impact your blood sugar, still does impact it. So my suggestion would be slowly but surely, like over the period of 3 to 6 months, start to throttle those carbs, start to jack up your fat. And it sounds like you need a healthy source of protein, Teresa. Things to think about: if you eat animal products, obviously if you can get off the chicken, pig, cow train, that's better. So if you can access to any kind of wild meats, whether that's fish or venison or whatever it is, that's going to be helpful. If you can't, you just want to buy the highest quality meats that are available to you, and that really depends on where you are in the world. Do the best that you can. Based on the foods that you reference, sounds like you're eating plant-based, Teresa. If so, you might want to think about doing a protein powder, protein supplement. I'm not a huge fan of isolated proteins, but I do use them because, especially when I'm traveling, it's just really hard for me to get my minimum amount of protein, and that extra 10, 20, 25 grams that I'll supplement with, it makes a huge difference in terms of my satiety, the way I feel full or not full, and just my metabolic health and my body composition. I'm currently using pea protein. I also like hemp protein. I stay away from rice protein. I'm not, I think there's dubious processing ways that it's processed, and I stay away from all of the other proteins because they just give me terrible protein belly, meaning pain, gas, bloating, that kind of thing. So that would be my suggestion to take a look at for everyone who's experimenting with carb throttling. Keep in mind that you have developed all of your bacteria and your digestive enzymes and all these kinds of things have adapted probably around the fact that you eat 300 to 450 grams of carbs per day. And it'll take a little while for your body to readjust. Not years, but for sure months. And so be patient with yourself, go slowly, but understand that you're moving towards a place that's a lot more balanced. It's not normal to be eating 80-90% of your calories from carbohydrates, but most of us are doing that because They're cheap, they're delicious, they last forever on the shelf, and they're abundant. Hope that's helpful. Thanks, Teresa.
This week's iTunes review is by Mermom from the US. Mermom says, I listened to the thyroid adrenal episode this morning and have been binge listening all day. Information is delivered in such a clear and relatable way. I can't wait to listen to all your episodes. Thanks for sharing. Mermom, you have won the Yoga Trapeze. Email us at podcast@yogabody.com and we'll ship it to you.
If you're a regular Yoga Talk Show listener, you'll definitely want to get on my email list. Go to yogabody.com/sign me up. When you enter your email address there, we always have free giveaways every month, yoga straps, water bottles, discounts in our shop, and all kinds of other things. When you sign up at yogabody.com/sign me up, I'll send you just one email a week with updates about the show, special offers, new courses, and valuable information that I think you'll find useful. So go to yogabody.com/sign me up to claim your free prize now.